Good evening. This is August 16th of, wait, come back. Oh, well, it's August 16th of 2023. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Wednesday night Bible study. We're in the book of John. We're in the last chapter of John. John wrote his gospel to expand on the first three, what they call the synoptic gospels, because they kind of have the same synopsis. They're very similar in the story that they tell. As far as the order or what they tell, Luke is different. We're going to get to Luke, but John felt there were things missing, so he's telling everything they didn't tell. Here's the rest of the story. Hey, Susie, here's the rest of the story. So Jesus has risen from the dead, and he's given his disciples instructions. And are they following the instructions? No. And I want to discuss why. What was going on with the disciples? And so, John chapter 21, verse 1. It says, after these things, after what things? After Jesus had been crucified, he rose from the dead, he appeared just to the women at first, just to Mary Magdalene and to the other women, on purpose, told them, tell everybody he's risen. You get the gospel message first. The men he'd already given much instruction to, and they weren't following any of it. So he wasn't going to give the instruction again. It's fascinating when Jesus does appear to them later, he doesn't repeat what he had told them earlier. Because once God tells you something, he's not going to repeat it. He wants you to believe it when he says it, and he doesn't want to have to say it 15 times. He wants us to get used to, God said something to my heart, and I need to believe that and hold on to it and act like it's important. As opposed to, oh, well, he'll tell me later. Let me finish reading this magazine. God's like, nope, I'm not going to say that again. When I say something to you, you need to listen to it because it is important. And so he doesn't give further instructions to the disciples other than to appear to them. And then they freak out because they did not believe the women when the women had said they'd seen him. They didn't believe the two guys on the road to Emmaus when they said, oh, Jesus appeared to us, because it made no sense to them. If Jesus is going to appear to anybody, he's going to appear to us first. Surprise. Apparently, somewhere in there, he appeared to Peter, somewhere that same day. But I'm assuming they didn't talk. I'm assuming he just appeared to Peter to let Peter know, I'm not mad at you. But he didn't say anything, apparently. Well, we don't know, because Peter never told. So when we get to heaven, let's all get in line and say, okay, Peter, what's up? What did Jesus say to you that you didn't tell anybody? And again, maybe he didn't say anything. Maybe he just appeared to him. But we know that he appeared to Peter because Peter later told everybody, well, yeah, Jesus appeared to me too. Okay. So then he disappears. Oh, but he appears 8 days later, he appears to Thomas. Not just to Thomas, but he appears while Thomas is there. The disciples have still not left Galilee, even though Jesus has said to them, go to Galilee. For some reason, they're like, Galilee, maybe we'll go. And I don't get it. I don't get it. So, because the women came and said to them, Jesus, well, we're going to go over it. Okay. So after these things, after he's appeared to the apostles, I'm going to call them the apostles because there were 70 disciples. There were 12 apostles. So the bigger group, right? There's women, there's all kinds of people that followed Jesus. The 12 apostles. So after he's appeared to the 12 apostles, and there are other disciples in the room too, for the second time, it says, after these things, John 21:1, after these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. Now, Sea of Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee are the same thing. It just depends who John is talking to. And my wife and I do this all the time. There's a street in our city in the middle of South Central that is now called Martin Luther King Boulevard or MLK Boulevard. It used to be called Santa Barbara. And it depends. If we talk about yesterday, I was on Martin Luther King Boulevard. But if we're talking about 30 years ago or 40 years ago, when my wife was going to USC, she's going to say, yeah, and I right on the corner of Santa Barbara and Vermont And I know what she's talking about because that's what they called it back then. So when her mind is back there, she calls it the name of the street that it was back then, And so John does the same thing. And it happens a couple times in the Bible where they're talking about the same mountain, and it depends who they're talking to. And same thing with the Sea of Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee. Same name, it just depends. They later called it the Sea of Galilee. At the time they called it Sea of Tiberias, or actually switched that, right? So, in John chapter 6, verse 1, it says, after these things, and John says that like 4 times, after these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. It just tells you in John 6, chapter 1, it's the same sea. Verse 2 says, then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs, which he performed on those who were diseased. Up in Galilee, which is in the north, so many people believed Jesus. He had great crowds following all the time. Down in the south, in Jerusalem, that's where the Pharisees were poisoning everybody against Jesus. So they were in trouble down in the south. But up north, Jesus had no problems. It says in verse 3 of John chapter 6, and Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Everybody knows the mountain. Yes, that mountain in Galilee. Yes, that famous mountain in Galilee. So, hey, Rodney. So he goes up on the mountain. He comes back to that mountain. So there's the Sea of Galilee. There's the mountain in Galilee. Everybody knows what the mountain is. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 through 19, it says, and Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. So when Jesus first chooses his disciples, 11 of the 12 lived in Galilee. His disciples were from Galilee. They were not from Jerusalem. They did not descend from Judah, the tribe of Judah, or the tribe of Levi. They weren't Pharisees. They weren't priests. They weren't just regular people from some of the lower brothers. By that I mean Abraham, Isaac, Jacob had 12 sons. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Simeon, Levi, and Judah, they all lived south around Jerusalem. Judah, right? The Issachar, Zebulun, these brothers, the first 6 that Leah had, they had prominence. They were important. The other ones not as important in their eyes. Oh, you're from one of the maids. You're from one of the other wives that really aren't even wives. The disciples came from them. And sometimes we think God's going to choose, that's an important family over there. I'm surely God will use one of them. God's like, no, I'm going to use someone over here because then I'll get more glory that way, because you want to attribute it to their breeding. You want to attribute it to their upbringing and their money and their wealth. I'm going to use a surprise person. God loves using those surprise people. That former gang member, that person over there who's just somebody's maid, that person who's somebody's gardener, that person who grew. I'm going to use, that teacher who, taught for 20 years in a small little school. I'm going to use these people because then when you see the miracles that happen, when you see the things that happen, you'll go, that must be God. So someone like Donna Maston, I'm just throwing a name out there. When she talks about God and what God's doing in her life, people go, Donna's doing that? Wow. So Jesus picked his disciples from Galilee because that area, people are like, nothing good comes out of Galilee. So that's the area he chooses. Okay, so when he first chooses his disciples, he goes to Galilee, Peter and Andrew. In Mark chapter 14, verse 27, at the end of his ministry, so the very beginning of his ministry, that's where he's choosing his disciples from. At the end of his ministry, he says to them, Mark chapter 14, verse 27, that Jesus said to them, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. It's just written that way, so it's going to happen. You can't talk me out of it. God already knows what's going to happen. I'm telling you so you don't get crazy when it does happen. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. So that's, and we've already talked about that. That should be in their minds. wow, now that he's been risen from the dead, he said, but they're not moving for some reason. Jesus had to appear to them twice, send all these messages like, go to Galilee. You think I've lost because I went to the cross because you still don't get it. But I've got you. You have to go back to Galilee. Like, what was so important about Galilee? Why didn't God just do it in Jerusalem? Whatever Jesus had to tell them, why did he make them go to Galilee? Great question. We'll find that out tonight. Mark chapter 16, verse 7. He told the women, but go tell his disciples and Peter, and I love that, tell the apostles and Peter, make sure you single out Peter because Peter's freaking out the most, that he is going, this is what the angel said, that he's going before you into Galilee, and there you will see him as he said to you, because he told you that, right? So, so they finally go up to Galilee. Why did Jesus need him to go to Galilee? So in verse 1, after these things, after he's appeared to them twice in Jerusalem and had some fish, then he says he showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, which is the Sea of Galilee. And in this way he showed himself. So John wants to say, so this is how it happened. Simon Peter, and he's going to list the different, now there's 5 apostles with him and then 2 more disciples. So again, I'm separating, disciples are just the students. There are 5 of the, well, there's only 11 at this point, right? 5 of the 11 who have who are there in this little group, and then 2 extra disciples who've been hanging out with him since the beginning. They just weren't chosen by Jesus, specifically in the very beginning. So Simon Peter's there. Why? What is special about these particular 5? What is special about these 5? Well, they each have when Jesus called these 5, chose these 5, he said interesting things to them. They don't remember. That's not why they're sticking together. They're not going, Jesus said interesting stuff to us, and we should all just stick together and just kind of walk around Galilee together. Jesus already knew their personalities, and they end up together. Simon Peter's there. Andrew's not there, but okay. In John chapter 1, verse 40, it says, one of the 2 who heard John speak, John the Baptist. So Andrew and John, the evangelist, are sitting there listening to John the Baptist. They're following him. So they're already kind of pretty religious. Andrew's pretty religious. John is pretty religious. He's supposed to be at the boat helping his brother James with all the fish and stuff, but he's already a follower of John the Baptist. So it says, one of the 2 who heard John the Baptist speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, we found the Messiah, because John had said, see that guy, follow him. He's the Messiah. Oh, okay. So they haven't said anything much to Jesus, but he goes and finds his brother. Verse 42 of John chapter 1, and he brought him to Jesus. Now, when Jesus looked at Simon Peter, he said to him, you are Simon, the son of Jonah. And really, you're descendant from Simeon. You're Simeon's group, which means unstable, because Simeon was the unstable kind of crazy brother. You shall be called Cephas, though, which is translated a stone, which means solid. That's going to be your new name. He didn't say that to all the 12 disciples. He didn't give them each a nickname. And you're Annette, and you're Mickey. And he didn't do that. Just certain of the disciples, he said, I want you to think about yourself differently. So Peter was the first one because he had a calling on himself, and you need to change how you see yourself. Then there was Thomas the twin. So again, there was 5 in this group. Thomas is the one, and I make fun of Thomas because the first time he's really mentioned in John, and John makes sure he mentions Thomas because John recognized Thomas later became important. Again, John's book is written 20 years after everybody else's, maybe 30 years after everybody else's book is written. So John knows the ones who became important. So when he tells his story, he makes sure he includes Thomas. John chapter 11, verse 14 says, then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Again, this is when they had come to and sent word to Jesus and said, he's at the point of death. And Jesus said, okay. And then waited 3 more days until he was definitely dead. So, well, that's an interesting choice, Jesus. But we already went into why, because it needed to be in everybody's mind that Lazarus is dead, not kind of dead or almost dead, or his spirit was hanging around his body. No, dead. Then he says, I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Because I'm glad. That's a good thing. Nevertheless, let us go to him. So sometimes Jesus in our lives will let something die. And because he wants to resurrect it in front of us, may go, oh, seriously. So we go, oh no, a defeat. And God's like, no, that's not a defeat. I'm about to resurrect that thing. Don't worry about it. Then Thomas, who was called the twin, apparently he had a twin brother, said to his fellow disciples, let us go also that we may die with him. Because they knew the Jews were waiting back in Jerusalem to kill Jesus. Okay, let's follow. Now, I make fun of this because but here's the good thing about Thomas. Let's go. We're all about to get killed. Now, I'm sure all about to get killed, but I'm still ready to follow this man into death. And that's a good quality as opposed to Peter's always talking Jesus out of stuff or trying to. Jesus, no, but Thomas was like, I'm not going to fight it. We're all going to die. I'm sticking with you though, Jesus. And so that's an interesting quality about Thomas, he just needed the factual proof. Didn't make him a devil. Some people just need more proof than others. Jesus is not mad at that. But Thomas, you have this quality that even if we're all going to get killed, you'll still go. So I like that quality. You're going to need that quality later. There's Nathaniel. He's because then there's 5 disciples, there's 5 apostles in this group that Jesus appears to. Nathaniel of Cana in Galilee. So Nathaniel lived up there. They were all up in Galilee. They lived in Galilee. So I don't know why it took them so long to go back to Galilee. Another reason that Jesus wanted them to go to Galilee, it wasn't safe for Jesus to appear to the disciples. Wasn't safe for them. Jesus was already dead, so what are you going to do to him? Can't kill me again. So, but the disciples were not going to be able to concentrate if they were afraid at every second, at every moment, that the Romans going to rush in on them. So go up to Galilee. I'll meet you back in your hometown, and then I'll talk to you there. What took them so long? Bless their heart. So Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, so he lived there. Here's the thing about Nathanael. Here's what Jesus said to Nathanael. And he did not say something special to all 12, just to these 5, interesting enough. And those are 5 that are kind of together because God already knew. So in John chapter 1, verse 47, when Jesus first meets him, it says, Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him. Philip is bringing Nathanael. Andrew brought Peter. Even though Andrew and Philip saw Jesus first, that didn't make them more important than I've been a Christian for 20 years. I've only been a Christian for 5 years. That doesn't make you less important. Philip and Andrew saw Jesus first. They were into Jesus first. But that didn't make them, Jesus ended up using Peter and Nathanael, even though they came second. So, the order of when you find out and you meet Jesus, that doesn't mean anything to God. So Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, behold, an Israelite indeed in whom is no deceit, no guile. Now, he'd just been reading about Jacob, who was full of guile, who was full of deceit, who was always trying to fool people. And so Nathanael says to him in verse 48 of John chapter 1, how do you know me? Like, why are you saying that? And Jesus answered, saying to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. He's like, uh-oh. So Nathanael answered and said to him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. Like, that's amazing, because that was way, way, way over there. How could you have seen me? But he says, yeah, God already showed me a vision. And people would sit under fig trees and read the Bible. So he was reading the Bible. He was reading a particular passage. We know what he was reading because Jesus tells him. And he says to him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. He's so impressed that you saw me under the fig tree. That means you're the Messiah. And Jesus said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, you believe? Like, you really have no guile. You're really easy. I know the people who are easy. I stand in line with you, people can fool you easily. And so he's like, wow, you'll just follow anybody. Yes. So I have to keep my eye on you, Nathaniel, because you're persuadable. So just because I said I saw you in the fig tree, you believe like, oh, you must be the Messiah because I saw you in the fig tree? He says, you will see greater things than these. And he said to him, most assuredly, I say to you hereafter, because if you were convinced by just I saw you in the fig tree, wait till you see this other stuff that I'm going to do. You shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Because that's, you were reading about Jacob and the angels descending and ascending on him, and Jacob, whose name I had to change, Jacob, who was this deceiver sort of person. You're not like that. You have no God. You're not like that. You're not like Jacob. But what you saw with him going, oh, I wish the heavens would open up. You're going to see the angels descend of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So, and then it says the sons of Zebedee. So this is Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel, and then James and John. Here's what he said to James and John specifically. And again, only these five did he have something special to say to. In Mark chapter 10, verse 35, it says, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Really? Okay. So he said to them, what do you want me to do for you? Which is hilarious. Jesus, and maybe people do, people do this. Okay, I'm gonna ask you a favor. I want you to say yes in advance before I even tell you what it is. No, you need to tell me what it is. Will you do me a favor? Will you do me a favor? Not until you tell me what it is. So Jesus is saying, what do you want me to do? So they said to him, grant us that we may sit one on your right hand, the other on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I be baptized with? So the cup that he drinks, we were just talking about the last couple of weeks, right? That cup that he says, Father, if this be possible, let this cup pass me by. That cup of dedication, that cup of suffering, that cup of I'm willing to do whatever, even if it means going to the cross. That final cup, right? Are you willing to say whatever and I'll die for you? And now James was martyred. Are you willing to that? Do you have that kind of devotion? And be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with, like immersed in all that I'm going to be, the scorn, because this is just the very beginning of his ministry. Like when they're going, oh, give us the glory, the glory, the glory. He's like, okay, but the suffering's coming. You're that first group that's going to be martyred. But you get to walk and talk with Jesus for 3.5 years. You get to see miracles. You get to see me walk on the water. Other people, like I told Thomas, blessed are those who don't believe, don't see all that and yet still believe. You're going to see the whole thing, but that means you're called for great work, that you're a great work. It's always equal. Oh, you saw Jesus appeared in your room? Sorry, that's not a good thing. That means you've been called to a great work, because you're going to need that kind of faith to withstand the things that are coming your way, because you need to know Jesus called me to this. Because we always think, oh, Jesus showed up in my room, I'm going to get lots of money. No, you're going to get lots of trials, but you know that you're doing the right thing because God appeared to you. So even when they come against you and talk about it, you say, nope, I know I'm doing the right thing. So he says, are you able to drink the cup and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? And they said to him, oh, we're able. They didn't know what he was talking about. So Jesus said to them, well, you will indeed drink the cup that I drink. Actually, you're going to. And with the baptism I'm baptized with, you will be baptized. So you've been chosen. You're one of those five. Peter, Nathaniel, Thomas, James, and John. Yep, you're going to be part of the five. So, and then in John chapter 21, verse 2 says, and then 2 other disciples were together with him. So we don't know who those other 2 were, but they're just of the 70. So those 5 are together, just hanging out. Not because Jesus called them out and said, oh, Jesus called us special. No, they're just hanging out because they're friends. But Jesus had already seen it. God had already shown them in the vision way ahead of time. You 5 are going to be together after I'm crucified. You're going to be by the Sea of Galilee, and I'm going to appear to you because you have a special calling. You have a special story to tell. So Simon Peter says to them in John chapter 21, verse 3, I'm going fishing. So they get to Galilee where Jesus told them to meet him, but Peter says, I'm going to go fishing. Now, we know that Jesus told them to go to a mountain because of what happened, because of Matthew chapter 28. John is filling in all the stuff that's missing. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 10, when Jesus appeared to them, and it says, Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. Then right after that, it talks about what was happening in town with the Roman soldiers and how they were bribed to lie about what happened and say, yeah, they hit us on the head and then they stole the body. None of that happened, right? Then in verse 16, it says, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee. And he doesn't mention, nobody but John mentions that 8-day period where they were just hanging out in Jerusalem and Jesus had to appear to them twice, right? Matthew just says, then they just went to Galilee. It says, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. So Jesus had told them to go to a mountain. But when they get there, Peter says, let's go fishing. Again, Matthew doesn't tell that part about the fishing part. John says, well, let me tell you what happened before we got to the mountain, because it's very important. So in Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, I want to talk about the mountain. And I want you to look at what I'm reading in chapter 16 and 17 with different ears than when we normally read these chapters. Know that this is the mountain that that Jesus is finishing his lesson. He starts his lesson to them in Matthew chapter 16 and 17, and then he finishes it on the mountain after his resurrection. So he's prompting them for everything that's about to happen on the mountain, because on the mountain is where he gives the Great Commission, where he explains everything, what they're going to have to go and do after his resurrection. They couldn't take it before he'd been resurrected. What are you talking about, Jesus? And la, 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 la. I'm not listening. They couldn't take it. But he explains, he gives half of them beforehand. And so listen to this, knowing that this is part one of a lesson this is all about the resurrection that's going to be completed once he's been resurrected. So when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, which is not Galilee, but it's near Galilee, he asked his disciples, saying, they're on their way to the mountain. He asked his disciples, saying, who do men say that the Son of Man am? And they said, well, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Because he had just started, and he just started doing some miracles. So he said to them, but who do you say I am? Because that's what's important, who you think I am. If you don't think I'm the Messiah, then when I'm crucified, you'll get depressed and you'll cry and you'll lock yourself in a room. If you think I'm the Messiah, then you won't be as panicked. Also, if you think that the mission of the Messiah is to die on the cross, you won't freak out. If you think the mission of the Messiah is to destroy the Roman government and put you in charge, then you're going to miss the whole thing. I'm going to say something. Sometimes we miss what God wants us to do because we think God's plan is to take over the government. And he's like, no, my plan is for you to talk about I've risen from the dead. I have my own kingdom I want to establish on earth. I'm not trying to change earthly kingdoms because you started those. I'm trying to get people into my kingdom because my kingdom is pure. So if you're going to be waiting for me to topple the Roman government and change the government, and I have a whole other mission. I have a whole other mission about spreading who I am and getting people to come into my kingdom. I'm not trying to invade their kingdom. So, who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay, Jesus answered, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who's in heaven. Like, you get it, even though you don't really get it. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock that of what you just said, that I am the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I'm going to build my church, and the gates of Hades won't be able to prevail against it. My church is going to be moving forward and knocking down the gates of hell because I'm going to be bringing people into my kingdom. And in fact, he goes and says, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. Oh, well, I could have just kept reading. Verse 19, and I'm going to give you the keys of the kingdom, because I'm trying to bring people into my kingdom, which operates under totally different rules than the rest of the world. And whatever you allow on earth will be allowed. Whatever you forbid will be forbidden. In this new thing I'm creating called the church. Then he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was Jesus the Christ. But don't tell anybody that yet. They need to discover it for themselves when it is time. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and then raised on the third day. So I'm giving you part one of the lesson. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be raised. That's going to happen. And then I want you to come back to Galilee and I'll give you part 2 of this lesson. So Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Far be it from you, Lord. This should not happen to you. Everything you're talking about, Jesus, you making that up. And Jesus is like, no, I'm giving you the plan. I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and then I'm going to be crucified, and then I'm going to raise on the third day. That's why when all that happened, and he went to Jerusalem, and he was crucified on the third day, they're like, oh, no, and they're panicked because they didn't believe what Jesus was saying. I'm giving you part 1, and they're like, no, Jesus, it's not going to happen. We do the same thing. There are things that Jesus tells us that we just don't believe. That's not going to be how it's going to happen. First of all, we're going to take this city, and we're going to take that city, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And Jesus like, nope, that's not how it's going to happen. It's going to happen a whole different way. So when things start falling apart, and we think they're falling apart, we're like, oh no. And Jesus like, this is what I was telling you was going to happen. But we kept rebuking it. When the thought came to us, I rebuke that thought. That will not happen. I pray. And we don't know that we're like praying against God's plan. Now, fortunately, we can't stop God's plan. But we're not prepared when it happens because we had a whole different plan in our heads. And we think it's falling apart and we're stressed out. It's okay, God forgives us. And eventually we finally give in to it and go, oh, this was part of the plan. Why was I so panicked? Because I wasn't listening. Because I already had a plan that I was telling Jesus what to do. We tell Jesus what to do too much in our prayers. Lord, come to the hospital right now. I want you to go on every floor and then go and just knock down their crutches and scare those nurses. And like that's not my plan, that's your plan. I have a whole other way that I'm going to change things, right? So if we stop telling God what to do and we say things like what Jesus said, not my will, but thy will, then we'd have a better, less stress-filled life. So he turned to Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. I'm trying to tell you part 1 of the plan. Part 2 is where I'm about to take you to the mountain where I'm about to take you. Part 1 is I go to Jerusalem, I crucified, I get raised. That's part 1. Shut up, Peter. Okay, you are offense to me for you're not mindful of things of God and the things of men. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross. Because that's what I'm about to tell you in part 2. Some of you are going to be martyred. It's going to be hard. You're going to be one spreading the word. But because of what happens to you, the word will spread. The earth will be full. There is 12 of you who believe me now. But in the year 2023, 1 billion, there'll be 1 billion Christians on the earth. There'll be more people who are Christians that are alive today. In Jesus' time, there were not 1 billion people on the earth. They couldn't even imagine a time where there's 1 billion. Now there's 4 billion Christians. We're only a fourth of there's 3 billion that are not Christians, but still, that's more than 12. And they couldn't even understand through your sacrifices, through the things that how you're going to be martyred, but because you're going to believe so strongly, your faith is going to change people. Like those people were threatened with death and they still believed. What they're saying must be true. So he says, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For if desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it, will find eternal life. For what profit is the man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? So don't deny me. Like some people are going to deny me once it gets rough. I don't know what Jesus was. And he wasn't even talking about Peter and them. He's talking about after the resurrection. After all that, there are people who it's going to get so rough in Jerusalem, they're going to go back to sacrifices and sacrificing sheep. And they're going to deny the blood of Christ. Don't be like that. For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each one according to his works. So, and he's talking about what's going to happen 40 years from now when Jerusalem is destroyed. Don't be like some of the people in Jerusalem who are going to turn their backs on me. They're going to be destroyed. You'll be rewarded with eternal life or eternal death based on your choices. And it's going to be hard. Surely I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So some of you, John, will still be alive when I give you a vision of the apocalypse. I give you a vision of all that. And the Son of Man comes back and all this happens that I'm talking to you is going to happen. Where he talks about, not one stone of this temple will be, all that's going to happen. And you're going to have to not stress out and hold on to your faith. That's what he's talking about here. This is part 1. I'm going to give you part 2. Let's go to, so in the next verse, Matthew chapter 17, verse 1, it says, and after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. This mountain is in Galilee. How do you know? It doesn't say Galilee right there. Well, we'll keep reading. So they go to Galilee from Caesarea Caesarea Philippi, they go to Galilee and they go to the mountain that he had taken them to before. He takes them back to this mountain in Galilee to give them the beginning of part 2 of the lesson. And he was transfigured before them. So they see his resurrected body. They see him in his resurrection. I'm showing you part 1. I'm going to die. I'm going to be crucified and raised from the dead. Now let me show you what's going to happen. I'm going to meet you back here after my resurrection. And this is what you're going to see. I'm previewing it for you, so don't freak out. So it says, his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to him, talking with him. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And Jesus like, what is wrong with him? So while he was speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. Hear him. Don't be talking about building something to Elijah and Moses. What's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? I've been talking to you this whole time and said, oh, well, that's everybody. No, not everybody. Me. So, and when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. But Jesus came and touched them and said, arise, do not be afraid. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only, because that's who it had been about. And Peter was confusing people. But I wanted to show you my resurrected form. You're going to meet me back here. I'm going to be resurrected. This is going to be part 2 of the lesson. I'm giving you part 1 and telling you you have to deny yourself and take up your cross. But I'm going to meet you, because they had never seen, they couldn't imagine a Messiah who died. They only imagined a Messiah who kills the Romans or something. But they never, they'd never seen somebody come back from the dead. This was like, what are you talking about? So let me show you what's going to look like. And his disciples asked him, saying, I'm sorry. Now, as they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead, which is where we are in John. So don't tell anybody about this. But once I've risen from the dead, I want you to say, hey, you guys, guess what? On the mountain, we saw the resurrected body of Jesus. We said, that's the time to tell them. Does Peter tell them? No. Peter says, let's go vision. Because if they would have said, let's go to that mountain and that you saw his resurrection. He probably wants us to go there because that's where he told us to go. Why are we going vision? But they don't. They just follow Peter's vision. Anyway, let me finish. So he says, tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, why did the disciples say that Elijah must come first? And Jesus answered and said to them, well, indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. Meaning there'll be prophets coming in the spirit of Elijah. Elijah's not coming back. But there'll be prophets in the spirit of Elijah who are going to restore all things how they're supposed to be. Because Elijah called down fire from the sky and he took down those people who were leading the Jews astray. Jezebel, and Hezekiah are just Jezebel. That's like took them down, right? And Elijah, there are prophets coming in the spirit of Elijah who will take down the leaders who are leading everybody astray in Jerusalem, and this is all going to be destroyed, just like that was destroyed. But I say to you, Elijah has also already come. And he's talking about John the Baptist. And they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Like John the Baptist, they beheaded him and all. So they're not understanding people who come in the spirit of Elijah. Likewise, the Son of Man is about to suffer at their hands. And they're like, what? Yes, that was me. That's why I showed you my resurrected body. Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. So they got that. All right. So when they come down from the mountains, because just don't forget, only 3 disciples got to go up. Nathaniel wasn't there. Thomas wasn't there. 3 disciples went up. When they come back down, all the other disciples, the other 9, Jesus left them, and they won't say what happened on top of the mountain. But when they come back down, there's this big dispute happening among all the disciples. And when they come to the multitude, a man came to Jesus kneeling down and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic. He suffers severely, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't cure him. These other 9, right? And Jesus answered and said, faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. So he's yelling at the disciples because he had left them in charge. He had given them power of his spirits and all that stuff. But now he was gone away from them. And they looked at this person with epilepsy and said, well, he can't be cured. That was a decision they made in their mind. If you were blind, they thought you couldn't be cured. If you were paralyzed, you thought you couldn't be. If you were epileptic, they thought you couldn't be cured. And so they never tried. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. They didn't try. The disciples basically said, it's not like they were trying, come out, come in, come out. They weren't, come out. They were trying different voices. That's not what was going on. They didn't try. The disciples said, we can't do this. The disciples came to Jesus privately and says, well, why could we not cast it out? Because we didn't feel like we could cast it out. Like, hey, come out. Nothing happened. So and Jesus said, because of your unbelief. It wasn't like, he says, if you have the faith as a mustard seed, you'll say a mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. You didn't have this much faith, like of a mustard seed, which is small. You didn't, because you didn't believe. You didn't, because you were thinking, nothing's going to happen. Okay, I'll try. Come out. But you weren't even, because you didn't think, you thought, that's like going to somebody who's blind. Oh, yeah, you're healed. You don't think it's going to work. So you didn't even try. However, this kind does not go out, but with much prayer. In fact, you got to believe, you got to pray, you got to fast, you can't, if you don't believe, there's nothing's going to happen. And now, it says, now, while they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, so the mountain was in Galilee. That mountain where it happened was in Galilee. That's where we know where it was. So now while they're staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. And they will kill him, and the third day he'll be raised up. And they were exceedingly sorrowful. So he's still continuing the lesson. I'm explaining you what's going to happen once we go to Jerusalem. Please believe me. Don't freak out when it happens. Well, we don't believe you. Well, okay. So now he sent them back to the mountain in Galilee. He sends them back. Go to that mountain where I started this lesson. Now that I told you I'm going to be raised on the third day. Now let's finish part 2 of the lesson. So Peter says, let's go fishing. So they said to him, okay, we'll go with you also. And they went out and immediately got into the boat that night, and they caught nothing. Why? Because they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. They're supposed to have been on the mountain. So I'm going to stop there, because when they get in the boat, Jesus has to give them another lesson, right? Let's go back to the beginning when you first met, remember? And all the but I'm not going to repeat old stuff. I've already told you. I need you to recall those things because I said them to them. I'm not going to change. Maybe we had parents that they would forget that if you don't do this, I'm going to punish you in this way. But if we just wait a couple weeks, good, they don't remember what they said. Jesus is like, I remember everything I said. I'm not going to say it again. I'm saying new stuff, but I need you to recall what I said to you because it has not changed. But maybe you can look at it differently now that you're older, wiser, sort of, and go, oh, when he said that, let me give me a new interpretation on that. Because when I heard that, I thought it meant this. But now that I think about it again, when he says you'll be a teacher of men, you didn't mean I had to go to get my degree and go teach at elementary schools. You mean that you're going to send my nieces and nephews to me and I'm going to teach them about God. Oh, I thought it meant something different. And that's why I've been trying to get my, master's in science, but that's not what you meant when you said be a teacher. Oh, now I can look at it differently. And, you just mean, I get it now, right? So Jesus is like, I'm give you a new lesson here at the Sea of Galilee. And maybe you'll think to yourself, oh, now let's get up to that mountain. And so, because that's where the lesson finishes. All right, so I'm stopping there. 5 people go. Jesus had something special for each of them. There's a reason why they're all there. And now they're in a boat in the Sea of Galilee. They're not near the mountain, but Jesus meets them where they are. He gives them a new lesson, which we'll go over next week, that finally leads them to the mountain, and then it all clicks for them. Okay, thank you so much for being patient, for waiting until 7:20 for my lesson. And I will see some of you on Sunday where we're in Exodus. We're on another mountain. And Moses is about to get a lesson from God about his glory. And then I'll see others of you next week when we get in the boat with Peter and them, try to figure out why Peter's naked. Okay, so thank you so much. And I don't know how to, there it is. And I'll talk to you later. All right, bye-bye.